Good morning, everybody. Cowboy here. V the Grill is on his way in. I'm here with EM Burlingame, and this is somebody. If you haven't heard of him yet, you're going to hear of him soon because his work's taken off like wildfire, and it's really enjoyable stuff. If you look in the description, you're going to see a couple of links. The first link is going to be an algorithm that I have built as a sample for you, and it's free. Go click that link. We'll send you that algo immediately. It's from our paid sponsor, Algo Factory. Also, EM's work is in the description. I have his Twitter channel in there. EM, your Substack actually is where a lot of really good stuff is coming out, but I've seen you've been putting more stuff on Twitter lately. So either way, EM, how you doing, sir?
I'm good. And you?
Doing good. Doing good. It's a Thursday morning. This time of year, as you know from your experience, my work is it slows down, right? The markets really slow down. You have these kind of spurts of activity. Jackson Hole's coming up, so you have a lot of speculation going on as to Jerome Powell and this and that and the other. So it's almost like you work for a couple hours and then you just go do other stuff. That's how I'm doing. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good.
That's awesome. So you just analyzing the even the small sample of the breadth of your work. We've gone over a lot of different things, and we've gone back in history with your work. We've talked about some of the red herrings that were given as who we should be upset with. We've talked about some of the red herrings that were given as things we should be doing. I think that what might be helpful is for people to really get the genesis, the financialist killchain. And I know our audience is very hi kitty cat. Our audience is very interested in learning as much as we can learn about what might have, like, where this comes from, who the people may be, how it all started, and all that kind of stuff. So where would you start with that?
Yeah. I would start with, and that's Atoll, by the way, everybody. I would start with Fukuyama and say that Fukuyama was absolutely, fundamentally, and ludicrously wrong. History doesn't end. History doesn't stop. We are still dealing with the very same mindset, in some cases, the very same, not necessarily families, although that's somewhat true, but more organizations and institutions that go all the way back to Rome.
So you think that these institutions, if you will, really started in Rome? Could it have been that they were in existence before Rome, or do you think really that's the genesis?
Yeah, so a great question, and I think the right question. Because it's a as I wrote about in the book, The Eternal War, which is available on Amazon.
I've got a signed copy, by the way.
Yeah, that's true. Signed by me, even. Because we go back, because it's a frame of mind and seems to be a biophysiological, neurological wiring. I'm sure it goes back to the frickin', and you can see it in other species, not just humans, but all social species, monkey troops and gorillas and the great apes and the lesser primates. And you see it in wolves and you see it in lion prides, so this is, this estrogenic kind of manipulation, control, threat, and danger from behind the scenes is with all kinds of social species, pretty much everyone I've ever seen, going back to when I was young. So I think, yes, it far predates Rome. The the issue for us primarily in the West and, continental Europe and the English-speaking peoples formerly out of the Isles, and now all over the world, is that written records for us in terms of tracing back things, and there's huge gaps in it, et cetera, but our ability to extrapolate, et cetera, really only goes back to Rome. So for us, if we're going to be, as honest a broker as we can be, and that should be, a man should always try to be an honest broker. And again, the best he can be. He can be fooled and he can have gaps and he's going to develop his understanding across time. But point being is, if we're going to chase this specific structural, institutional-like behavior back, Rome's, and quite honestly, you can't go back a little bit early Rome in the Republic days. You can't go back a little bit to some of the Greek stuff. I think it was Plato who wrote about the problem with oligarchs and oligarchy and the dangers of that. So, yes, predates Rome. But again, for us, in terms of those that we are still dealing with, those are the old Praetorians of Rome.
Yes. So for the audience who might be kind of new, certainly to your work and maybe even to our work, can you talk about who the Praetorians were?
The Praetorian Guard. The Praetorians were established under Caesar Augustus as the house guard, the private guard. They were taken from elite soldiers, elite mercenaries, even some gladiators. But these were the Eric Prince's boys of the world. Eric Prince, Blackwater, whatever it's called now, right? And their sole purpose was the physical safety and security, or at least that's what they were founded for, of the elites of the Roman Imperium. They were, and people know, anybody who studied history, the Praetorians killed emperors and they put their own emperors on the throne. And what is less known is that the Praetorians were also the guard for the magistrates, the judges, the judiciary, generals, senators, which is the elites, oligarchs, and nobles, and others, right? So you could not be a true elite in Rome, in the Roman system, for 300 years, starting with Caesar Augustus until they were defeated, drawn all out and defeated in battle in 312. So roughly 320 years or more, they were the secret power of Rome. And how did they control it? Well, a lot like our intelligence agencies today. Threats, assassinations, color revolutions, coups. Now, what happened in that is that they accumulated immense wealth and property and assets that they couldn't own directly. So they had all these structures and formats in which they could, accumulate immense wealth without actually, without it being obvious. Well, what's been happening, since the financialization of all of the West, starting in the 1600s with Westphalia? That's the Praetorian system. Didn't they kill 2 Kennedys? Didn't they just try to kill Trump on live TV? How many others, how many coups, assassinations, just in the last 80 years that we can directly, track and document? How many assassinations, color revolutions, how many times have the Praetorians, like Operation Gladio, right? So that's the Praetorians, and that's, who they've been historically. Now, they did get defeated in 312 at Milvian Bridge by Constantine. It took over 100 years to set that operation up, which is, I believe, there's no documents on it, of course, because nobody would, but I believe that's why there was a move to separate the two centers of power of the Roman Empire. It wasn't for what we've been told. I believe it was certain elites, true elites, nobles, senators, oligarchs, etc., realizing we've got to end these Praetorians, or they're gonna end Rome. And I think we're watching that now. So I don't remember exactly why I was saying that, but to your point, yes, it does go back before. I think it's just like I wrote about in the Eternal War. I think it's been with us since the beginning. Might even be a behavioral, a parasitic behavioral pattern that goes back to single cell, communities of single celled life.
Right. You're just when you're looking at records that you feel you can trust, it goes back to Rome. And
Yeah,
I know a lot of people who feel it goes back to Babylon.
maybe. But it's too far
So
for me. Yeah.
yeah, and there,
Yeah.
everybody's gonna. After a while, when records get too old, it starts to kind of fit into the same category as religion. But there are things that can be supported. So I'm not, this isn't my bailiwick. Um, I think there is an interesting conversation around like Westphalia. And I understand Westphalia to be, and again, not my wheelhouse, not my bailiwick, but Westphalia was basically, to hear you talk about it and others, sort of the end of feudalism and the beginning of nation states. That's like a certain way I can categorize it, but is that a miscategorization?
No, it's exactly what it was. And that had all been set in motion in the 700s. Charlemagne was, ostensibly made the Holy Roman Emperor. Why? So that he would go out and exercise the original Roman titles. He would go out and physically conquer and reconsolidate and physically hold, because you have to physically hold a title, the lands or the assets related. And so Charlemagne in the 700s was sent out, raised as the Holy Roman Emperor, to use his armies and his martial capabilities and his charisma and his organizational capabilities and his leadership capabilities to go out and exercise Rome's title rights to the lands of Europe. So this, for the next 300 years, really the next 500 years, the Praetorians, who had become Venetians and Venetian bankers, would use princes in Europe to go out and consolidate power, consolidate ownership, title to the lands and assets of Europe, specifically to go renew Rome, now through the Vatican, now through Second Rome, this virtualized Second Rome, which is Catholicism, to go out and exercise Rome's original title. But you got to get rid of princes at some point once they've done all of this fighting and all this warring, and you got to go bring down Byzantium. So the Fourth Crusade was directly against Byzantium, and they set up the Latin states, etc. And then they run out of martial capabilities of the European princes, so they bring in the Scandinavians, the Normans. All of that was to try and, reinstantiate Rome's title or claim to its former territories. But at some point, princes get uppity, and they have the title now, right? At least the modern title, underneath which the Romans consider, the Vatican considers, that there's a superior title, which is Rome's title, original title. And so, because all they work legally, this is the thing about Rome. Joseph Campbell talked this amazingly before he died in the 80s. The thing that Rome introduced into much of the world indirectly was this fundamental rule of law, this magic of contracts, formal contracts. So at some point you have to get rid of the princes because they were standing up and fighting Rome, and to such a point that they started the whole other aspect of religion, which was Protestantism. And then they went to war with Rome. That's what that really was. That wasn't about religion. That's how you get the masses to fight for your title, is religion, right? But what was it really? It was the Protestant princes were denying Rome's claim to the lands, to their lands and their assets, Rome's original claim. and as it was expanded as well under Charlemagne, etc. So today, so back to Westphalia and the Inglorious Revolution in the United Kingdom, that was finally, enough of the princes had done enough of the reclaiming of the lands and the assets. And there had been 300 years of war between princes that were like, yeah, no, Rome, we deny your claim, your title or claim to their lands and assets. And so what do you got to do? You pretty much bankrupted all of the princes, because you send them away to war every fighting season for 300 years. What's going to happen? They're going to be so indebted, and their people are going to be so exhausted that they're not available to fight. And then what do? You come in with this financialist structure, this, for stock companies, stock markets, all of this derivatized artificial reality capital system. And you start buying up lands and properties and assets. Now you're superseding the princes, post-Roman princes title, because you're buying the title from them, and now you're just taking that back to Italy, back to Rome through the banks and the banking systems, etc. That's still going on today. The issue is now, and they had to create the nation state to do that, because you still need the young men to fight and defend the claim to the land, the claim to the title of the land. And they needed nation states to do that, because they needed to pool resources and assets. And young men were less and less willing to die for religion, because that had been going on for 300, 400, 500 years since the 1054 schism. And so they created the nation state to again re-steal the land, reaffirm the title. But now the nation state model's in the way, because the young men, what's left of the young men, are not available to go be an expeditionary force for you to expand your title holdings, your asset holdings, and fight and defend your claim to your title holding, your asset holdings. But they will stand and fight for their own land. So you got to get rid of the nation state. You got to bring down the nation state. You got to flood these countries with people that have no claim to the land whatsoever, no claim to the title. They're no threat to you, because they'll never own anything. You're paying their rents anyways. They're a physical threat against your own people. And so that's what Westphalia was. Westphalia was putting in place nation states in order to have a structure, legal structures, that the land could be taken from steadily, which really culminated at the end of World War I, where several hundred noble houses were just wiped out in that bloody fight, which is what World War I was really about. Kill the princes, the ones that survive, and then go in and buy their land dirt cheap. And then you do the tax laws, the inheritance tax laws, starting the beginning of the last century actually starting the 1800s, to such a degree that the nobles what few nobles remained, couldn't afford to retain their lands and had to sell them off to pay tax debts, or tax obligations. It was all brilliant, but now you have to collapse the whole system so that you can lock in your claim. I'll pause there.
Well, so that does lead us into the financialist kill chain. We got V the Gorilla here, by the way. Good morning.
Hey, V.
Hey, good morning, EM. Good morning, Cowboy. How are you guys doing? I've just been listening.
We're good. We're kind of setting up the stage for the explanation of the financialist kill chain, which this was the work that when I first caught EM's work over Tom Luongo's channels, the financialist kill chain it was something that put into place for me. I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. And, one could argue whether feudalism is good or nation states are good. One could argue a lot of things, but I think it's pretty tough to refute the financialist kill chain mechanism. So it would be something that I think that our audience would benefit from hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's time that we delve deep into that. Go ahead, EM.
Yeah, so you guys are going to have to forgive me. My memory is not what it used to be. So I'm going to draw it up here so I can, there we go. So I can have the 7 steps. You need
to stop the bare knuckle boxing, EM. That's going to,
Well, I'm divorced now, so that's over.
Nice.
Okay. So what they're trying to take us in the West through in the collapse of nation states, et cetera, is step 7, right? To to finalize and lock in step 6. But let me go back and read the list. Okay. So, and all of this, none of these are happening completely independent or in a direct linear line, right? There's different things happening in different places. So, okay. So first step is infiltration and influence. The financialists embed themselves in a country's leadership, posing as advisors or allies, right? 2, debt entrapment. They push unsustainable loans, locking nations, princes into into repayment cycles, which they can never actually repay. And even if they could repay, what you're going to do is you're going to spark a war at some point, or a conflict at some point, or a color revolution at some point, that they're going to have to borrow more to fight just to survive, right? So you're never going to let them, even if they could, like Argentina could, but they never let Argentina do it, right?
Right.
But we got to remember, Argentina was one of the wealthiest nations in the world per capita back in, just a century ago. The third thing is they do in this debt, you have to have collateral assets set against debt. Well, this is how they do step number 3 in the process of the prince or the country putting up, or a corporation or et cetera, putting up collateral. What are they doing in there? They're doing number 3, which is asset identification, valuable resources, land, industries, tax bases, and infrastructure are targeted, meaning in the process of step 2 of getting you in these debts, now they get a clear delineation of all of your collateral, your physical assets, and they assign definitions, descriptions, and risk models and evaluations, right? All under the guise of loaning you money and helping you out. Step number 4 is now they move to economic destabilization. Markets are manipulated, economies are manipulated, populations are manipulated, input, like Germany right now has been heavily disrupted. Why? Because they were heavily dependent on one input. So we blew up the pipeline that input came across, right?
Right.
So that's another way of economic destabilization. It's not just, bond markets and, all the sophisticated stuff that you guys know better than I do.
Oh, not to derail you, we got to put a bookmark right there. The news came out this morning. It was a Ukrainian who took a yacht out there with some scuba gear. That's the latest news on who blew up the pipeline.
These Ukrainians.
Yeah, with their yachts.
Their yachts.
And they also, in unrelated news, it was a couple of Russians with firecrackers that bombed Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So anyway, I digress.
I want some Russian firecrackers for reasons. Okay, so that's number 4. Step number 5 is debt for asset swaps, right? You're going to have to swap, you can't pay the debts. You need to borrow more because we've destabilized you and we've caused some problems. So you're going to have to borrow more. So you're going to have to give up these assets. And you're going to have to give them up at dirt cheap because now there's a higher risk profile, right? And I've written risk factors for private equity deals before, right? Okay. So debt for assets. Assets are seized in exchange for debt relief. And generally, what is that debt relief? Oh, they don't make the debts go away. They roll it over into even more debt. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Step number 6 is extraction and exploitation. Wealth is drained through profit and extraction. Think 2000 or the .com. Think the GFC. Think COVID. These are all wealth extraction systems and mechanisms. Think the war in Ukraine, which they wanted to make a world war so they can do total mass extraction and exploitation. And then ultimately, and this can take for substantive peoples like the English-speaking peoples, the English civilizational peoples, this can take, like Rome, this can take 300 years for them to go through this whole cycle and process. And here's where we are. Step number 7 is what was always the ultimate goal. Once there are not enough native sons to be sent away to war, right? Once there's not, because that's the only reason they prey upon these. It's not just the assets. What it really is they need the manpower to go out and kill for them.
Right.
Right. The only currency that's real, I think we've talked about this before, but the only real currency is violence. Everything else is a derivative. Everything else is an artificial derivative contract. At some point, you have to defend, you have to enforce physically with violence your claim to physical assets. period. Right?
Yeah.
And once it's, smaller countries, this can happen in 30, 40 years, as we see in, Africa, Southeast Asia, et cetera. Sometimes it takes 80 years. Sometimes it takes up to 300 years, et cetera. But the final step is abandonment and collapse. You've got to, and it should be the other way around, collapse and abandonment. The nation is left broken. Its riches gone. Its young men. Its only currency. Its only real asset are young men. The land isn't an asset, really. The real asset is the young men who will fight for the land. Because without the young men to fight for the land, you don't have the land. You don't have the assets of it. It's free. It's up for grabs. To anybody who can take it, I don't care what your fucking contract is. Right?
Yeah.
So step number 7 is once the young men are expended and there's no more ability for them to fight abroad for you to exercise your claim, physically exercise your claim through violence of other physical assets, and there isn't enough of them there's a transition point. What they want to do is they want to go through, take you through the collapse and abandonment after you don't have enough young men to fight for your own lands in your own countries. So generally what they do is they send them all off to a slaughter and a war right before they do the collapse. And if they can't do that, then they tie them up in a slaughter of a civil war. And they tried that here in the United States in the 1860s. Didn't work. And we took in a vast amount of immigrants and replaced the young men. And so we were available for another century and a half, more than a century and a half, to go on and continue to be the bully boys for them. But we can't do it anymore because what they did is in the GWAT, they not only expended all of us, taking total and absolute control of all the terrorist organizations and criminal organizations of the world for the oil kingdoms, but they expended the last true martial capacities of the English-speaking peoples while indebting us all in the form of tens of trillions of dollars of debt. So it's a delicate dance here at step 7. Step 7 is where this kill chain can fail. And the reason is if the people of the lands that are being taken through this financialist kill chain, which for us in the English-speaking world has been going on since 1688, the initial takeover of us started in the 1620s, 1640s, but the final complete, infiltration and takeover of the English-speaking peoples, 1688, the Inglorious Revolution, we've been running on for all this time. We're that capable, but there's only so many of us young men left, or fighting age men, which are even men in my age. The financialists have this is the most dangerous step for them because sometimes, like Milvian Bridge in 312, the native sons will stand and fight for their own land while there's still enough of them and they're still capable enough to do it. And so this is why they've been pushing so hard for war in Ukraine, war against Russia, war against China, war against Persia, war against the BRICS, which there's absolutely no way possible we'd win. And just like every war we've fought since World War II, they wouldn't arm us enough, equip us enough, allow us to do what we need to do on the battlefield to win anyways, because they don't want us to win. None of the wars we fought were about anything, were never about winning since the 1940s. They were about killing off young men and driving up debts and stealing more assets, more of our assets. Mm-hmm. So I'll pause there before I get fired up.
Yeah, no, go for it, man.
No, go ahead. That's the kill chain. That's the financialist kill chain. And where we are right now is they've got one more step 6 seize and steal all the assets. That is the retirements and the assets of the boomers. That's the last massive pool of wealth, and it's the largest pool of wealth that's ever been accumulated in human history. And that's what they're trying to do using blockchain and opening up the stable coins and allowing private equity in 401k portfolios, et cetera. All of that is setting up.
It makes sense. It makes sense. And I'll tell you why it makes sense, right? They've done a recent poll. And in that recent poll, they polled all the Gen X and millennial kids of the boomers who are retiring.
Yep.
And the question was postulated to them, will you leave these retirement accounts in where they are, or are you going to pull them? And 9 out of 10 of Gen X and millennials and Gen Z and whatnot, they're like, no, we're going to pull them, because they're not into the investments that their parents and grandparents are into. They're into newer stuff.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you there. Let me pause one moment, okay? Because I agree with the overall theme, but it's not about that they're not into what their parents are. It's that they don't have the assets that their parents had at the same age.
Correct.
And $2 trillion in student loans.
Yes,
that started with Gen X.
Right. And so, I was definitely getting to that. I just parsed it wrong. What I was trying to say is they because they don't have a home, they don't have savings, they don't have any of this. They're like, no, we're going to take that. They want to invest it in their way, and this is why Wall Street is trying to make it very attractive right now. For we got this new blockchain investment thing. We got this investment thing. Oh, don't worry about Bitcoin being $300,000. ETF. The ETF.
We can still give you the asset value inflation that your grandparents and grandparents benefited from.
Exactly.
But we can't do it in the fundamental assets because they've been so bloated, so overvalued. You're absolutely right, V. So, and I didn't mean to quibble a point with you, but you're absolutely right. The worst thing that could happen for the Financialist is that all of this boomer wealth gets parsed up, pieced up, et cetera. That's why they're bringing private equity in, because that's what private equity does, going all the way back to the leveraged buyout days of the 70s and 80s, right? Gordon Gekko stuff. What do? They do the same thing. They do portfolio destruction, asset destruction, but they do it in a way that feeds the Financialists, that takes out the hard collateral assets, revenue streams, things that can still appreciate in value. Excuse me. And they sell that off, parse that up, hold that, and just throw away the rest.
They strip mine is what they do. They strip mine. And the Wall Street Gordon Gekko reference is also not to be ignored, because what they did in that movie is they found a company that had very well-funded pensions, and they went ahead and tried to gut the pensions, and then the company fought back. And I don't want to ruin the movie. And a spoiler alert from like a 40-year-old movie, but
but it's exceedingly relative to today. Or relevant, to today, because they were openly telling us in in that movie, right, in Wall Street, they were openly telling us, and anybody who read Forbes at the time, which I did, I was a weird young man, and I got into the corporate restructuring in the early 90s after I got out of the Army, which was trying to fix those problems, right? Go in and, because for starting in the 70s into the late 80s, early 90s, private equity came in and just destroyed the economic base, the industrial base of the United States. It wasn't going to fiat currency. It wasn't all that other stuff. That didn't help. That enabled them. But the industrial base of the United States was just not destroyed by offshoring and all this other stuff. That happened because they had to do it, because the private equities guys came in and strip mined all these corporations, some of which were 100 some odd years old, were very stable, were very good at what they did, etc. It was the financialization of the country, and they were openly telling us. They made movies about it. They made it sexy. There was the whole yuppie movement.
Yes, correct.
Right? Greed is good. And Michael Milken and, all these guys, right? Junk bonds. It's all the same. It's all still happening. Crypto's just the latest, Bitcoin included, is just the latest variant of this. They need 100%. An artificial, and none of this has to do with currency and all that. We can reset. The dollar's doing just fine. What this is about is they need artificial financialized assets that can inflate asset values for the next 30, 40 years to keep all of this going. And they have to have us to buy into it, so they allow enough younger people to make some money off of it, right? Some people to create actual, real fortunes they wouldn't otherwise. Why? It's called customer conditioning.
Yeah.
It's mass formation. But what is it all setting
mass
up?
formation psychosis. Yeah, we haven't heard that term in a while.
Right. What it's setting up, the last commons, okay? The last commons, the last assets that are owned by the people, genuinely owned by the people, is the boomers' wealth in all of its many forms. And that is the last thing for the Americas, for all the Five Eyes, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom, Ireland, United States specifically, and Europe, Western Europe. That is the last massive pool of assets and wealth to be stolen.
Correct.
And we just passed a bill here, the stablecoin, and I know Tom is supportive of it and all that, and I respect Tom's, but Tom's not a warfighter, right? This thing that was just passed, this whatever bill, whatever stablecoin act, it's the Genius Act, is setting up. It is genius. It's a brilliant way to steal. And they spent the last 15 years customer conditioning, mass formation around digital assets. But the whole purpose of it is to steal the boomers' wealth. The Xers and millennials and Zoomers will never get it, because it's the last vast pool of wealth they have to steal to keep their whole thing going.
Correct. And that's exactly what it's about, man. It's about chasing the yield. They need the next big thing. We've been in a liquidity crunch for since 2008. They need to keep this bubble going. And this is the last thing.
Yeah. Okay. So terribly sorry. I want to refine something. Okay. Sure. We've not been in a liquidity crunch because we make up liquidity. Sure. What we've been in is a collateral crunch.
Yeah. Solvency.
Yeah. We've been in a collateral crunch.
We've been in a solvency issue.
We used to be able to handle it with treasuries, but then the debt got so high, right? And so now they've been using more and more. This is what's actually driving up housing values. It's not just BlackRock, et cetera, but what's been driving up, what's been used as hard collateral is actually CDOs, collateralized debt obligations, CDOs for real estate, CMOs, I think it is.
Collateralized
mortgage obligations are being used as hard collateral increasingly over the last 10 years. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, insane.
Right? But what that means is that, the old concept of the sun, right? Once the sun has reached its useful life, it starts to collapse down. It'll blow up initially, and then it starts converting hydrogen into higher, into
heavier elements,
and then it starts to collapse and collapse and collapse. And the way in which where a sun is in its cycle is what are the heavier elements that it is predominantly producing or feeding on. Well, in this case, we went from treasuries, which was just 15, 20 years ago, were solid. Now we're using CMOs. What does that tell you? It tells you that the economy, the financial system, is now in collapse, is already and has been in collapse stage.
Interesting solar comparison. So for people to understand, that's how elements are created. The suns feed off initially of hydrogen. I think helium as well. I'm not that great at the science, but where gold comes from, for example, gold is a much heavier element. It's as the sun collapses, it actually creates heavier elements that are more exotic. And far less simple. So yeah, really interesting. So in this case,
isn't it amazing we use gold, which gold itself is a product of a collapsing star?
Yep.
Interesting.
Well, actually, every element in the universe is.
Well, it is, but I'm getting though, like gold is pretty far down. To get to gold, you got to have gone through all the other elements.
We could do a whole show on that because the only suns or stars that are of a certain size can create the more exotic elements, and this is why we don't really have a lot of palladium and stuff. Yeah. But that's a really cool. Like I said, we could maybe have to go, spend an afternoon.
We don't want people to think we're nerds, though, right?
Yeah, we're not nerds. No. Yeah. Money and fighting and wars and stuff. All right.
Yes.
Back to the good stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you're saying that like the collateralized mortgage obligations are sort of now like the deeper you get in strip mining, the more exotic the instrument has to be.
Well, exactly. So exactly
more synthetic, really.
More synthetic, more derivatized, right? Yeah. So it is a derivative of an actual. Okay, so treasuries themselves are a derivative of underlying economic assets, revenue stream, primarily revenues, right? Economic activity. Treasuries are a derivative, a virtualized representation of the health of an underlying actual functioning economy and all of its complexity. Once you get to CMOs, you're another level up. Now we're going to stable coins. That's a whole other level up, right? And it's not a single step up. This is like an eigenvalue increase in the orbital of electron, right?
Yeah, I mean, the stable coins are vastly backed by treasuries, so you're basically just doubling your treasuries in a sense. Like you're diluting treasuries. I mean, in the end, it all comes down to what are you physically producing, and that's another conversation. But it's what got us in trouble in 2008, anyway, right? Not stable coins, but
if you have
assets.
You're a mathematician, Nick, right? So if
that's a generous statement.
Okay, well, if I have a decaying number, right? So it's going from a value down to 0. And I have a decaying number that I multiply by another decaying number. Doesn't it increase the rate at which we get to 0?
Yeah, what you're doing is you're compounding instability, right? So yeah, and this is literally exactly what you're talking about.
Well, not instability, but again, back to the star, right? And as the star crosses that threshold where now it starts to convert helium, because it converts hydrogen into helium and then helium into oxygen, I think it is. And then it goes from there, right? And it accelerates, okay? So the same thing with, it's not instability, it's now got a runaway reaction to where it is fundamentally converting what remaining actual fuel it has into things that aren't, for it to sustain, aren't real and are going to lead to its ultimate explosion, destruction, collapse, etc.
Yeah, it's a critical mass thing. It's a cannibalization is not the right metaphor.
It's
not quite the right metaphor. It's a, you got it.
It creates a runaway, right? Where it accelerates to 0. But that's step 7. They want that to happen, but they've got a danger, and we're in it. And it's why all this stuff, and this is why, and I haven't watched it, so I can't ascribe this, but Dave Collum on Tucker saying we should have supported Hitler. Wait, what?
Yeah, I saw. I think he was to be careful with that. He was, I think, referencing somebody else who said that. So
that's why I want to be careful there, because I didn't watch it. Okay,
what a great! I'm about halfway through that though. That's a really good episode.
And it got pushed out right as he said. Okay, so and that's why I wanted to qualify. I haven't watched it, so I'm not going to say that he said it, but it got out there like that and it got pushed around. I'm seeing swastikas show up in places I never thought. In the digital space, I'm seeing, so step 7, it turns out that Western peoples don't actually, as a group, take to communism, to Marxism. At a certain point, our disgust mechanisms kick in and we throw that stuff out, unlike the East. The problem that we have is that we are susceptible to Nazism. And I don't mean fascism, because that's Benito Mussolini, 1932 speech, right? We've had fascism since the 1940s. That's what World War II did. It put in place fascism in the United States. That's what FDR was doing, putting all the infrastructure in place. That's just
to quickly give that some training wheels for the new people.
Yep.
So a lot of people equate fascism to far right. And when you go onto Wikipedia, it's going to say far right. And that's bullshit. Fascism, very simply defined, at least the way I understand it, is when the corporations align with the state.
Well, they're one. So it's when they're one. And the way we do it is through the regulators and the revolving door between corporations and regulators. So it's when the corporations, fascism under Benito Mussolini, and you're absolutely right. What fascism is right of left. It's not right. It's not center. It's not right of right. It's right of left. Okay. And it's a religion. Benito Mussolini said it. The state is my religion. He still adhered to Christianity, etc. But the state is okay. So we need to be careful right now and not conflate Nazism, National Socialism, eugenicists, eugenics, and just straight up Praetorians. These are, Nazis are just Praetorians. That's all they are. The Reich, right? Let's call them the Reich instead of Nazis, because Nazis is such a dirty word. But the Reich is the Praetorians. Give me a second. The Praetorian system, regime, the Financialist killchain, the Financialist, whatever you want to call them, depending on who you are. We are in the West, Western Europe, and the English-speaking peoples susceptible to the Reich, to Nazism, to fascism, and probably part of it has to do with that. A good half of the English civilization is Germanic in origin, as is our language, as is our history. So and I've been calling this out for years, has been a big concern, because in the 19 teens and 1920s, this is what the Nazis did, is they fed the Marxists, drove the Marxists, and then when they were ready to move and when they set all the conditions, they ushered in Nazism and the Nazis. Well, what are they? They're a parasite. We didn't defeat the Nazis in World War II. We brought them all in Operation Paperclip, Sunrise, and Gladio, and all that other stuff, right? Thousands of them, and not into, refugee. No, right into the government, right?
Yeah, heading up NASA and all that.
Heading up NASA, working Galen and the CIA, and right.
I think some of them made their way over to. I don't want to get to. You set it up.
Give me a second. Where was I going with that? No,
you were talking about So
we didn't defeat Germany, or we didn't defeat the Nazis. We defeated Germany, and Germans lost somewhere close to 5 million young men in World War II. We didn't defeat the Nazis. We just we funded them in the first place. Everybody can go back and look at that. Dulles brothers and everybody else, even before the war. Prescott Bush and all kinds of others. But we brought them right in.
George H.W. Bush's dad.
So point being is that what the Nazis do, and these Reich do when they rise to power as this parasitic Praetorian, is they send all the young men away to war. And they get them all right. They get the young men into a place of disgust. They get the young men into a place of despair. Weimar Germany, right? Weimar Republic. And they start subtly tooling up racial hatred. They start tooling up, the shaping and the controlling of that genuine rage and wrath, because it's got to be genuine. And then they unleash it on who they want to unleash it on. But why do they do that? They're not doing it because we've got some great ideological war. No, they need to kill the native sons. Why? So they can do step 7 of Financialist killchain and take all the assets and wealth. And the few sons that do survive, because they will, right? You have to then guilt and shame them for the next 80 to 100 years to control them, because they went and did some horrible, atrocious things. Because in many cases, they didn't have any chance otherwise.
Yeah, they would have been killed otherwise.
They would have been killed, impoverished into nothing. They would have been replaced, like it's happening across the West, etc. So the problem is that the way in which this estrogenic mind works, and anybody who's been in an unhealthy relationship with, an estrogenic-oriented person, gay guy or trans, I don't even know about them. That trans,
or just a weak male,
or weak male,
hyper-feminized,
crazy women, right? They know this, are raised by a mother like this, maybe, right? What do? They push and push and push and push, and they put you into an impossible situations, emotionally, psychologically, physically, etc., to where your only recourse is to strike out. And the moment you do, now it's all your fault. Now it's all on you. You're to blame. And then they guilt shame you, and they get other people. Look, see, nobody sees all the other stuff or is willing. People can see it, but nobody's willing to get involved and tell that crazy, insane estrogenic, stop fucking doing that. So they do it on purpose. If that's happening at a personal level, millions and millions of people right now, as we're having this conversation, are living with this, right? Tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people. Right now, as we're having this conversation, this very thing is happening to people. But they drive and force and push and do that also at the society level, at the financialist system level, because the Praetorians are estrogenics. They're knives in the back. They're whisperers. They're all this kind of, right? And so they get you into a place where the young men have to kill. And they try to shape you that way. So you go kill who they want you to kill as you're getting slaughtered off, like we just saw in Ukraine, which now it's finally coming out that, yeah, about 2 million Ukrainian men are dead.
Yep.
Right? From age 16 to 60.
It's
Ukraine's
crazy.
right. Ukraine's over.
How many decades were spent, radicalizing them into Nazism? And if you think there's no Nazis over in Ukraine, I mean,
yeah, sorry, Banderas. Who did
Gladio
Bandera work for? The CIA, right? So, which is the Praetorian Guard part of the Praetorians. So, I mean, point being is that things that happen at the personal level happen at the society and economic and international level as well. It's the same stuff, the same factional, behavioral kind of stuff playing out. The next step that really concerns me, because they have to steal the boomers' wealth. They can't get Russia's. They can't get China's. They know it now. They can't get Iran's. They can't get the Middle East. They know that now. So the only wealth left for them to steal, the only collateral left for them to steal to keep themselves in power after 400 years, back to the Westphalia question, right, comment you made, is the boomers' wealth. Well, they got a problem standing in the way. Us.
Yeah.
The native sons. So what are they doing? They're flooding our countries with people that will never assimilate. They're bribing young, violent men to come from other parts of the world by allowing them to rape our women and get away with it, to be criminals and get away with it. It's bribery. This Praetorians are trying to bribe foreign young men to come fight on our land for our soil. Or if they send us away to war, what few of us that remain and come back alive will have to fight these sons of bitches at home. And there won't be enough of us.
Yeah, as we come into the end of the hour here, we've done, I think, a pretty good job of talking about the financialist kill chain, steps 1 through 7. We're in 7 now. And so I want to leave people, I know this is like cheesy, but I'm always trying to leave people in a place of hope, because in my opinion, the way you get bad people, whether it's Nazis or whether it's, someone on the other side, the Antifa types, the way you do that is, which Antifa types are basically brown shirts anyway.
Brown shirts,
the way you get disposed, killing machines, mindless, you make people hopeless, right? And so I always try to kind of bring demoralized, no future. Yeah. So what right now, and we sat together a week ago. So we had some interesting conversation around what's actually happening when things can go kinetic. And you've said this enough on these shows that you're of the opinion that whether it's a large or small scenario, things will get kinetic. I could argue that they already have if you take a look at 2020. 2020 is a version how things can go kinetic without being nation to nation, right? The billions and billions of dollars were lost in the burning of cities, right? So that said, there are battles going on in the courts. And, that's a part of the conversation. Do we have a chance at getting things more or less, I don't want to say things can be fixed in the US, but let's just say set up to where we can recover without like 10 years of violence and another 10 years of depression? Like, do we have a chance? And what do you think that is?
It won't be depression this time. It'll be collapse, actual collapse. Okay, just like Rome. And I don't mean that as hyperbole, because we're dealing with the same people who gutted Rome. Right. The exact same institutions, organizations, banks that go back to all of it. All right, so give me a second. We still have the native sons to defend our own lands. That's a positive. Native sons can very quickly, and I have a book I'm finishing writing right now, which is a Modern Knights guidebook. We're going to get that out here soon. Young men can very quickly orient properly to fight the real enemy. The fundamental problem that we have, and this is the article I wrote yesterday, it's on Substack, emburlingame.substack.com, and it's on Twitter as well, is that we're all going to have to get okay with that label racist and racism those two words, and we're gonna have to get rid of a whole lot of people that aren't us. Yeah. And I don't mean that as an ethnic thing. That's the article I wrote yesterday. Is we have to think about cultural race, not genetic race. One, because genetic race is bullshit anyways. I'm like 6 different forms of white. I mean, they're all from similar areas, but so we need to be, point being is this. Yes, we still have the young men. We have the GWAT veterans. That's 20 some odd years, almost 30 years of experience fighting these types of conflicts all over the world. We're still young enough. We're still healthy enough. We've had our illusion that the system and the regime is healthy and good. And we're starting to see, like I did, the Financialist all on our own. So those are positives. We've got a lot of young men, the millennial generation, yes, they're in their 40s now, but I'm in my late 50s. I'm still in fighting shape, right? So it doesn't matter. Yeah. It's not, so we've got young men from 16 to 60 now who can fight, and we got a lot of them. And the vast majority of them don't have any stake or say or wealth or assets in the current system. And so they're not going to be able to be bought off with their comforts, et cetera. That's all solid. That's astounding. It's a depreciating asset, as Tom, mutual friend Tom Luongo would say, right? But we still have it, and it's still an asset, and we can turn it around. But we're up against one fundamental hard thing that they've been programming in since I was in school, since the 60s. I wasn't in school in the 60s. I was born in the 60s. But, since the 60s, they've been indoctrinating this whole racism thing. And the problem is that we're going to have to get over that word, and we're going to have to own it. But there's one proviso. We can't go start slaughtering brown people or Jews, right? We can't go that pathway because that's exactly what they want.
Yes, correct.
Right? But, hate to say it, a whole lot of people are going to have to get the hell out of our countries. And if they won't go voluntarily, we can take them by force. And if they resist that, they're going to have to die. And you're going to have to, in the book I wrote, The Art of Being a Man, one of the principles, one of the rules in there is, and I wrote a meme here as well. It's out there in the running in the wild, but you got to do horrible shit sometimes. There's no other choice. You're forced to it. You got to do horrible shit, and then you're going to have to live with that.
Yeah, well, bad guys come in all colors, right?
Yes.
So I think that one of the things that needs to be maybe reinforced here is that a civilization is not an ethnic thing.
No.
How many different ethnicities are in China, V? Do you remember?
It's over 1,100.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's right. You lived in China for a while, didn't you?
Yeah.
How many ethnicities are in Russia? Hundreds, right?
140.
But these are civilizations. So we're not, I mean, if there are people here who are Jewish and they're not buying into Zionism and they want to, be a part of the deal, I'm good with it. Right.
Read the piece I wrote yesterday about reimagining racism. I'm going to follow on, and then we're doing the book here again, the Modern Knights Guide.
Yeah.
I'll have that out here shortly. We're figuring out how to do that the right way. But to your question, and I know we got to wrap this up. Yes, we are not yet. Okay. Where we have to think about where we are as American peoples, as the English speaking peoples, is that we're in the same place that the Russians were in the early 2000s. And we're in the same place that the Chinese were in the 2010s. And they turned it around.
They made it through. Yeah.
And they kicked these financialists out. And how did they do it? They did it by going back to their civilization as the core base of who they were as a people. And we have to do the same. And they've been denying us all this, but hate to tell you this, if you're a native English speaking person, you are a member of the English civilization. I don't care if you're Irish, Scotch, Welsh, Canadian, whatever. If you're a native English speaker, you have a civilization. It's 1,100 years old. It goes back long before that, but it's been codified in laws and everything for over 1,100 years.
Right.
Time to get back to it. Right.
Absolutely. Very well said. EM, I love how we're going down the rabbit hole and we're unpacking all of this bit by bit, layer by layer. And folks, you can find an EM. Links are all in the description box. And can't wait to have you on next week, man. Can't wait to have you on next week. It's going to be great. Thank you all for listening in. We have John Singleton next. And with that being said, Cowboy, take us away.